Nahel Marzouk, the France riots, or is it the French Summer Revolution? It's not just the Muslims. Don't blame the Muslims. Yes! Anyone who has not been following world event lately would think this garbage that was being pushed as a Muslim immigration policy problem by Sky News Australia, an arm of the nefarious BBC, is actually balanced news for human consumption. But it's all foolishness, and a serious attempt to rebrand the horrible events in France right now, or simply to create another event from it. It's called the Hegelian dialectic. This is where powers that be create a chaotic situation and wait for the people to scream out for some answers or intervention. Then they can come in and announce and execute their pre-made solutions. That is, agendas that they would not have been able to pass if these unfortunate events that you see unfolding had not unfolded.
Ils ont tiré, wesh. Eh, c'est fini pour lui. Je sais pas qu'est-ce qu'il a fait, mais c'est fini.
Right now, at least, the French president, a type of popular Elvis Presley kind of man, has now announced that he may shut down the internet, basically in order to control the flow of information and to stem the revolution or the protests as it's now branded. This seems to be the case in many hotspots right now, and the information is just as relevant as ground events. Here is what he had to say. After returning from the Elton John concert where he was rubbing shoulders with the stars on the same day the riots kicked off, he came out and made this announcement. As the riots broke out soon after a policeman had murdered the young Algerian teenager, a poor immigrant from the minority communities, Macron came out with this speech.
Traffic rules. Speaking in Marseille on Wednesday, French President Emmanuel Macron called the killing inexcusable.
I want to say to his family, all our solidarity and the affection of the nation is with you. An adolescent was killed. It's inexplicable and inexcusable. These are words of affection, sorrow and support for his family and loved ones.
An eyewitness filmed the police performing the check, one pointing a gun at the driver. When Nahel tried to pull away, the officer fired at point-blank range, killing the teenager. The police initially said that the driver tried to hit the officers with his car, but video evidence appears to contradict that claim. The officer who fired the deadly shot was taken into custody, accused of voluntary manslaughter. Fresh protests are expected on Wednesday night in Nanterre, as well as...
After that, Sky News Australia came out with a video portraying the events in France as an anti-Muslim or a Muslim uprising, if you would.
President Macron said the shooting was inexcusable. His interior minister called for calm and promised a prompt investigation into Nahel's death.
Sky News host Andrew Bolt says the leftist media spinning the narrative and claiming racism caused the riots.
Now, the problem they claim is the white society. The whites who supposedly caused this. France's white society in this case is racist police, in particular the two police officers who stopped this 17-year-old Nahel Marzouk, an Algerian Moroccan youth, last Tuesday. Stopped him last Tuesday as he drove a car and he shot him dead. So apparently it's the police's fault that France is now burning. So say the journalists. It's not the fault of the rioters, apparently, who are actually doing that burning, doing that looting, that shooting, that bashing. Let me give you an example of the kind of deceitful coverage that I mean before doing a fact check for you with video evidence. This is from Britain's BBC, a state broadcaster captured by the left, as state broadcasters usually are, and pushing all the standard lines of the left to explain this extraordinary violence. This is unbelievable.
And it's the police that is driving people onto the streets in the first place. Many here accuse officers of discrimination. And even the UN says that France needs to address its deep-rooted issues of racism in the police force.
Nahel's family has appealed for calm, and so has France's national football team. They say it's tragic what happened here, and that working-class suburbs like this, where many people come from minority backgrounds, are suffering and have grievances. If you talk to youths here, they'll say, we face discrimination by police every day, but nobody listens to us. It is a reminder to people who feel discriminated against, who feel underprivileged in society, that they are right to feel outraged and they want to do something about it.
I needed to show you quite a bit of that because it's gone on and on. And it's like the BBC, it's not just the BBC either, it's like the BBC is actually excusing the rioters, as well as blaming French society and especially French police.
Whilst mainstream news outlets have used the riots as an excuse to create an us versus them race war mentality, Sky News contributor Esther Kraku says the destruction is just another example of the failure of immigration and assimilation in France.
You hit the nail on the head, Rita, when you talked about assimilation and actually integrating into a country where you actually stand for and identify with its values and its ideals. Look, we have many conversations about multiculturalism here in the UK, particularly when we talk about, how much do we tolerate if it's going to go against our own values. But really, the French could take a leaf out of the Brits' books, because at the very least, we have a conversation about it. We have a conversation about what it means to be British, what values you have to sign up to be here, and then, what people are not compatible with those values. We, as difficult as it is, we do have those conversations. In France, it just does not happen.
Yeah, exactly.
They just say you are French and therefore we don't collect any data. But you have to really get to the heart of what it means to be French and what your values are.
Exactly. Well, France has always refused to go down the assimilation route. It's a strange, the way these problems go back decades, and they've refused. They've had an underclass living there in the banlieue, and now they're going to reap the whirlwind.
Sky News host Andrew Bolt agrees, slamming the weak immigration policy that created such destruction.
More than 10% of France's population is now Muslim, thanks to mass immigration and illegal immigration to Europe as well. And it seems that many Muslims have had trouble integrating, as well as other minorities have, because culture does count, religion does count. I know we can point to a lot of successes. We can also point to a lot of signs of a lack of integration, a lack of assimilation. And France has learned that in the most savage way you can think of. For instance, Islamist terrorists slaughtered 130 people in the 2015 attacks in Paris. They murdered a dozen cartoonists and others in the Charlie Hebdo attacks. Killed 87 people in a truck attack on Bastille Day in 2016. Bastille Day. Ominous, right? Very symbolic. Now, note, by the way, there were no race riots back then by white Frenchmen. who would be justifiably outraged by these attacks on them, on their society, because they trusted the state, wrongly or rightly, to give justice. They waited, didn't scapegoat. Look at this. But it's not just the terrorism that indicates a real racial or tribal divide. France's Muslim minority has also tended to be poorer, much less likely to find work. And to repeat, culture does count. It is easy, but it is lazy to simply blame white racism for these results. Don't forget, other minorities in France have bloomed. The Jews, for instance, the Vietnamese, etc., etc. But tribalism, this new race politics, and you see it in America as well, you see it in Australia, you see it in Britain, it encourages, in this case, young Muslims to blame not themselves for any dysfunction, but French society and its culture and its institutions. And it encourages them to feel no loyalty to that society or culture and institution. None.
Okay, so why is Australia taking and leading its people into this anti-Muslim xenophobic stance? Could this be the fear that they have of their citizens, both black or white, Muslims or Christians, eaters, etc., rising up because they in Australia have been dealing wrongly with a lot of minority groups, especially the black ones in the past, and that hasn't stopped up till now? Or are they simply afraid that the global citizenry is getting tired and fed up of the powers that be and the way they're treating humans as their own personal war hero gameplay? Not to mention some of the lockdown antics of the past few years that didn't go down well with many Australians. So this revolutionary spirit, and the control of it is exactly what has been developing over many years in France. And that is what makes this current situation very dangerous. Here's a disclaimer. We do not endorse any type of violence, and this video is not a call to any type of violence or uprising or lawlessness anywhere. Thank you. The sheer number of the protesters and the violent actors seem to represent mainly the young demographics of France, and they are mainly white. That's a surprising thing. Even their young women are standing alongside their young men, and they are robbing the country's elite brands and shops and stores and businesses in solidarity with one another, which is a long-standing French Republic tradition, if you know your history, to stand together in times of struggles. It is the same ideology which saw France come through the First and Second World Wars, right? They came out stronger along with their allies. Now, that same French spirit is very well evident in this new wave of dangerous nationwide violent protests, and the government knows that. Some commentators out there believe that this is exactly what the same government have been looking for, desiring for a long time, and been instigating for many years now. And they finally groomed their youths through the advent of violent video games to prep them for this sort of mindless violence. Much of the Christian youth of France don't see these events or the precursor to these events mainly as an anti-Muslim killing and hence for a purely Muslim revolt, but perhaps as a war on all of French citizenry. All the French seem to be united on this one.
This is where those who have been seen as the underclasses, in the poor deprived areas, who have risen up and said, this is in our name. This is somebody, 17-year-old Nahel, who's triggered a huge response from them to say it could have been any of us. And if you look at the number of arrests, it's increased in the last half an hour. The French authorities are saying more than 1,100 people now arrested, the highest by far of the last 4 nights. So it is increasing in number. It's very hard to simply judge it by that, because
Even the French football team has come out to plead for calm, and as you all know, that football team is the multicultural and a multi-religious backbone of the country in many ways, in some cases more representative of the people than the elected bureaucrats themselves. So many see that move as very suave, as the French also actually now see it. Some commentators also note that Macron doesn't look physically or facially perturbed by these lethal unfolding events. In fact, he seems very relaxed. Maybe he hasn't seen the candle in the wind yet. Elton John. So how is this affecting the peace in Europe? And what may the ripple effects be? Thousands of traditional summer holidays booked from all over the world to France are now expected to be cancelled, or people made to think twice before they board their flights. I suppose that it would be only a matter of time before perhaps the military is called upon and deployed onto the streets to support the outnumbered and frightened but well-tested and prepared police force, as pure anarchy sweeps the streets of the most romantic nation in Europe. Major fashion shops and stores have been robbed, and big luxury brands like Apple, Louis Vuitton, and the likes have seen priority targeting of their stores and shops and warehouses in every city where they have one. We have seen videos even of Volkswagen cars. This is the German brand that was supposed to be emblematic of the people, i.e. the people's car, the people's vehicles, VW. They've been driven off from car dealership showrooms and car parks whilst they were still very brand new. The sheer numbers of participation in these crimes require more than the number of Muslims alone that live in France. Can't blame this on the Muslim. It's clear to see that it's a whole wide cross-cutting of the French young citizenry who are involved in this mayhem and this crime, which was kick-started by the murder of the young Algerian Muslim boy Nahel. Okay, so the feeling is that everyone, French people from all backgrounds, are in on this great heist. We have also heard of violent fights breaking out. Football groups are now roaming the streets in defense of their cities, so they say. Lyon fans, which is another football club somewhere in France, have become vigilante groups. It's unclear how this will help prevent further chaos. Anti-Muslim sentiments are now rising in some of the comments surfacing on the internet and on the football fans vigilante video platform. When there's no one else to blame, always blame your enemy, real or imagined, or you make one up. That's what seems to be going on in France right now and in Europe. However, it's rather evident that this unlawful burning and looting in the nation's cities are a joint work of the youth, white or black, Muslim or Christian or otherwise. There's no discrimination right there. If there starts any type of person-on-person violence, and if this show is not stopped sooner rather than later, then the escalation is naturally akin to a brewing civil war scenario. Some see that, however, as a far stretch. But can that be ruled out? Let's hope so. What's your view? So far, there have been over 3,000 arrests and over 45,000 officers deployed around the nation. The police officer and his colleagues who murdered the young boy, however, they murdered him in cold blood. It seems they have been detained and charged with the crime of homicide. So some see that as a quick response by the French government. And commentators have applauded the French government for making that move very, very fast. They say that if this was the United States, it would have taken months, if not years, to admit its improper conduct and bring these criminals to justice. Just the same things like we've seen in cases in the USA of Judge Floyd and the likes of them, who were brutally murdered by serving police officers. Okay, so the same commentators are now wondering if this new French farce, which has now seen a reported over 700 supermarkets banks and stores torched, looted and ransacked, and much of the shopping spaces under siege by balaclava-clad white and black male and female angry youths, that this may inadvertently spread as a model to similarly troubled countries if there is so much as a spark anywhere there. Anti-globalist fringe and protest groups, including the Black Lives Matter movements and the likes, are now being actively monitored by their respective governments and authorities in other countries to preempt this type of French Revolution violence that's just kicking up. As some of the French protesters have termed their criminal actions, the French Revolution seems to be ongoing full force. France has always been in practice an egalitarian society, but has also seen elements of Nazism, fascism, and far-right ideologies rise over the years, with people like Marine Le Pen, etc., making their feelings very vocal over issues like non-white, non-Christian immigration, both in Europe and their homeland of the French Republic. The big baffling question that many white people in Europe are now asking, trembling in their boots, however, is why is the young French white population so unashamedly in solidarity with the protesters over the racist murder and the protest of this young non-white Algerian Muslim boy? Several police stations and town halls have been set ablaze, and some officials even had their lives threatened, their families threatened, like the mayor of this city called the Roses.
Après 3 nuits sans sommeil, épuisés mais toujours déterminés dans le silence d'une nuit que nous trouvions étonnamment calme, nous avons vu le vrai visage des émeutiers. Sauvant des flammes notre petit garçon et notre petite fille. En fuyant avec eux, blessé au péril de sa vie, sa force et son courage a sauvé toute notre famille, et à cet instant précis,
Vincent Jean Bro something, who he had his family threatened and his wife had to flee for their life with their 2 children. I think it was. The situation is critical. Would the police now have done the same if this had been a young white Christian French girl driving that stolen car? Would they have shot her through the heart in cold blood, or would they have done something different? Okay? Would they have done that to her? The other question also could be, would France still be burning if the killing was of a young Christian black boy? Would everybody come out in solidarity for a young black Christian boy that was just murdered in cold blood, like we've seen severally in many countries now in Europe and America? Would they have come out? Would you protesters, would you have come out to defend a young black boy? However, in spite of all this evident racial profiling that led to this unsanctioned killing, the white French youth seem to have their own agenda, something that there might be a bigger game simultaneously going on. And this event of Nahel Marzouk, his murder, it may be used to make a well-needed incremental power grab for the globalist Great Reset agenda in Europe and by Macron's France. What we don't like, however, is this narrative that's trying to pigeonhole Muslims and the black minority communities as the villains in this disturbing French screenplay. Is this the beginning of the collapse of society in Europe, or has that already happened and this is the next obvious step? Can people make any sense of it and understand that there are also prophetic scriptures that forewarn us of such? And this is our wake-up call, maybe one of many, to seek understanding and truth before it's too late. It looks like a religious war could break out over something as simple as joyriding by young Muslim French youth. And the Christian response is always to exacerbate the problem. Will the French Republic nation unite as one and hopefully put this behind them peacefully? The murdered boy's family have also repeatedly called for calm, but not before accusing protesters of using their dead son's killing as an excuse for criminal acts. We have videos on our channel to teach you about the Bible and truth. If you're interested, please check some of the descriptions below. Stay safe and see you in the next video. I am Brother Tai. Shalom ear to you.